Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we want to talk about the impact of inflation on before-tax cash flow and later on after-tax cash flow. The good thing about before-tax cash flow is that inflation doesn't have any impact on before-tax cash flow. Inflation really becomes important when there is tax consequences. Before-tax calculations will never be impacted by inflation because real dollars and actual dollars are essentially equivalent. Actual dollars are adjusted real dollars by inflation, and we will see this in an example in a minute where you see that inflation does not impact before-tax cash flow. Therefore, rate of return or net present value figures remain unchanged for both with inflation and without inflation calculations. Let's take a look at one example. And in this case, in this example, we're going to use it extensively to discuss both with inflation and without inflation, before tax and after tax. So 4 different scenarios. A $12,000 investment with no salvage value will return annual benefits for 6 years, assume straight line depreciation, and a 46% income tax rate. Solve for both before and after tax rates of return for 2 situations, no inflation and with inflation of 5%. The benefits with no inflations are at the constant value of $2,918 per year, and with inflation the benefits rise at a 5% inflation rate. And in this table, what you see is that over the 6 years, we have these benefits in terms of year $0. And if we don't have any inflation, they become actual dollars because there is 0 inflation. So actual dollar and real dollar are the same. But if we have inflation of 5%, then the actual dollars after inflation becomes these values here. So we're going to be working with 2 cash flows. No inflation with 5% inflation for both before and after tax cash flow. So let's start with before tax cash flow and calculate the rate of return for both with inflation and without inflation. For before tax rate of return, if we do not have any inflation, then we can calculate the rate of return by setting the present value equal to 0 and solve for the interest rate. The without inflation cash flow is here. We are investing $12,000 at the beginning, and then we're getting these benefits each year. So the present value would be negative $12,000 plus 2,918 times P given A at some I percentage in 6 years. So if you solve this for I, which you can do either using Excel with the IRR function, or you can just do it by hand using the table or the formula, you will see that this is 12,000 divided by 2,918, which is equal to 4.11. That gives you IRR of 12%. And you can, again, do that in Excel, as you can see on the screen. So this 12% stays the same even if you apply inflation. In that case, you're working with this cash flow, and you're having the same negative 12,000 at year 0, all of these benefits over 6 years, and at the end, the rate of return that you get when you convert it to a real rate as opposed to market rate, you take away inflation from it and you convert it to real rate, it remains at 12%. So with or without inflation, for the before tax calculation, really doesn't matter. Inflation doesn't have any impact. So let me go ahead and write that down here. So as I stated here, for the case of with inflation, the benefits will be increased in proportion to the inflation rate. So computing present worth in both cases with inflation, without inflation, result in the same rate of return. And you can try that in Excel, as you can see in the screen. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at after-tax rate of return, and that's when inflation becomes really important. So for after-tax rate of return, in the case of no inflation, how would our cash flow look like? So if we don't have any inflation over 6 years, year 0 and then year 1 through 6, the before tax cash flow is negative 12,000 at year 0, and then for years 1 through 6 we have the benefit of $2,918. We do have depreciation, and in this case is a straight line depreciation. We have to take that into account. So straight line depreciation, you know that it's the cost base is 12,000 minus the salvage value 0 over the number of years 6. So straight line depreciation is 2,000. So each year we can deduct 2,000 from our income. Therefore, the taxable income becomes 2,918 minus 2,000, so 918. And then income tax at 46%, as it's given here, will be 46% of $916, and that is $422. Therefore, after-tax cash flow will be for year 0, negative 12,000. And then for years 1 through 6 will be before tax cash flow minus income tax. Therefore, you'll end up with $2,496. Now, if you calculate the ROR of this cash flow by setting the present worth equal to 0, you will have your P given A factor at 4.81, and if you use the factors table looking for this value in the column of P given A, you will see that your rate of return, or in other words IRR, will be about 6.7%. You can do that with linear interpolation, but I think the easier way is to either use the formula of P given A instead of the factors table, or you simply use the Excel to calculate the rate of return. As you can see on the screen, I did that in Excel. 6.7% is the rate of return if we do not have any inflation. Now, let's go ahead and do the same thing, but this time with inflation of 5%, and see how does the rate of return change. Now for part B, we're looking at with inflation of 5%. Now, the process of incorporating inflation in the after-tax cash flow analysis is as follows. So please pay your attention to see what are the steps and how do we start with a before-tax cash flow, and then how do we progress toward an after-tax cash flow to calculate the rate of return. Now, the first step is to start with a before-tax cash flow, but very, very importantly, real dollar, right? So before-tax cash flow, real dollar is negative $12,000 year 0, and then from year 1 to year 6 is 2,918, if you remember. And this is the real dollar I'm talking about here. So we're starting with that. The next step would be a before-tax cash flow, but this time an actual dollar. So how do we convert the real dollar to actual dollar? We know that is by adding inflation to the numbers that we have. And how do we add inflation? Well, by multiplying this to 1 point, the inflation rate is 5%. This is to the power of 1. This is to the power of 2. This is to the power of 3, and so forth. By doing that, we get the actual values. Well, for year 0, it doesn't change. But starting from year 1, it becomes 3,064. Year 2, 3,217. 3,378, and so forth. Now, once we have the before-tax cash flow in actual dollars, then we can get into depreciation and tax calculations. It's very important to remember that you cannot apply depreciation and taxes on the real dollar before tax. It has to be on the actual dollar before tax. And there is a reason for that, because actual dollar is what you pay taxes for. It's the tangible dollar, and it's the market dollar that you pay taxes for, not some base year real dollar. So that's why you're paying taxes on inflated dollar, and that means you're going to pay more taxes because the dollar values are inflated. Therefore, your taxes are going to be higher compared to the no inflation. You'll see how that change here in a second. So now we calculate our depreciation, which is using the straight line depreciation, still is $12,000 minus 0 over 6. So $2,000 is the straight line depreciation. That would be $2,000 each year. Taxable income becomes before tax cash flow in actual minus depreciation, right? So that will be, in this case, 1,064, 1,217. Once we have the taxable income, we need to apply 46% income tax on that. So 46% times the values of this column will be our income taxes. And then at this point, we can have our after-tax cash flow. But very importantly, this after-tax cash flow is going to be in terms of actual dollars, because right now we're working with actual dollars. The first after-tax cash flow that we get is going to be in actual dollars as well. And how do we calculate that? Well, we know that before tax cash flow, we subtract the income tax from them, and then we get our after-tax cash flow. So for year 0 is going to be the negative 12,000. That doesn't change. But starting from year 1 becomes 2,575, which is this value minus this value. And then once we have the after-tax cash flow in actual dollars, the very, very important last step is to convert the after-tax cash flow to real dollars as the last step. Basically, to have something similar to what we had here, before tax cash flow in real dollar. Now we got to end with an after tax cash flow in real dollar. And that would be negative 12,000 for year 0, but starting from year 1, in order to get to the real dollar, we have to multiply these values to 1.05 to negative 1, 1.05 to negative 2. Basically, we're taking away inflation from these values. Therefore, we will end up with 2,452 for year 1. So here you're looking at the real dollar after-tax cash flow, and that is what matters. We want to calculate the IRR based on real dollars cash flow. So now you can take this cash flow and calculate, IRR using interpolation manually, or you can use Excel, as you can see on the screen. It's much easier to do the whole process that we did here in Excel, but I did it by hand so we get to the nuts and bolts and mechanics of these calculations, because sometimes when we do it in Excel it's so fast and we don't see the details. But obviously it's very fast in Excel if you do that. So you can calculate the IRR of this cash flow, and you will see that that IRR is at 4.9%. So this 4.9% compared to a 6.7% with no inflation shows that inflation does matter for after-tax cash flow. But remember, for before-tax cash flow, it doesn't matter. If you don't deal with any tax calculations, with inflation or without inflation, will give you the same IRR. But for after-tax cash flow, inflation matters. In fact, inflation will decrease your IRR a little bit. And the reason is really this part of the calculation. You're going to pay more taxes because you're paying tax on inflated dollar. And that will bring down your rate of return. So in summary, for before taxes, we end up with 12% with inflation or without inflation. But for after tax, you could see that it matters. And the reason is that inflation results in increased taxable income and hence larger income tax payments. So I hope this video helped you learn how to incorporate inflation in before tax and after tax cash flow analysis.